Hello and welcome everybody to my first video tutorial, which deals with green stuff basics. Today we'll have a look at how to easily handle green stuff. What I'm going to do is add a few chitin plates to a gene stealer head. That miniature is part of my kill team and I wanted to look a little more aggressive than the off-the-shelf version. But first, let's take a look at my favorite sculpting tool. The tool was originally manufactured by Gale Force 9, and over the course of the years, I made some minor modifications to it. The flat head's edges were sharpened with a whetstone, which allows for additional precision and improved tool control. Here's a very similar Games Workshop tool for a direct comparison. The Games Workshop tool's head is rounded. That roundness prevents the head from being used to flatten surfaces. The close-up shot shows the difference in more detail. And here's a comparison shot with an even more similar sculpting tool. The close-up shows how much thicker that one is, preventing me from reaching into tighter corners. The thinner head allows for much more flexibility. At the end of the tools section, we'll take a quick look at the blade part. By grinding it, the edge became really sharp and lets me cut superfluous parts without having to reach for my scalpel. That goes for green stuff as well as mold lines I might have forgotten. The next chapter deals with preparations, but be advised, graphical content ahead.
Hi there, mate. What are you doing with those pliers? Oh, no, you're not going to. No, not my tail. Oh, no. Ouch!
Wow, that was tough. Let's go to a more fun part. Cleaning! It shouldn't come as a big surprise that, with all the plastic dust, bits and pieces lying around here, proper green stuff work is hardly possible. So we'll have to clean that up. Since this is not a tutorial about cleaning, I'll leave the exact method up to you. Just make sure your workplace is free of grains and particles. Next step, pour some water on your cutting mat. You don't have to use a pipette, but it's a much more practical way than scooping it up with your fingers. Following that, start mixing roughly the same amount of blue and yellow stuff. Knead it well, and you'll soon have a chunk of green stuff. Who would have thought that, right? Make sure your mix is all green and as homogeneous as possible. No blue or yellow stripes in it. Once you're done mixing, you'll have a pretty little blob like this. You can now have some fun with it, or stab it to death! Die! At some point though, you'll have to stop Julius Caesaring your blob and start sculpting. To facilitate my job, I like to reduce all the details I want to sculpt to simple geometric forms. Then I cut out a chunk that fits my plans best, in this case, a rather large stripe. The next chapter will deal with applying the green stuff to the miniature. So without further ado, take the stripe you just cut in shape and push it on the gene stealer's head. Won't stick. Oh, that's funny. Okay, back on track, right? Or not. Well, there's a neat little trick that might be able to help. If the green stuff just refuses to stick, there'll most likely be too much water on your miniature. Take a paper tissue and just hold it ever so tenderly against the water drop. It'll latch on right away. We continue by moisturizing our sculpting tool. It shouldn't, however, be soaking wet, just moist, barely glazing with water, no droplets. This will make things much easier. Equally as important, the miniature itself should be rather dry. Don't worry about a little moisture, but you won't have a fun time when it's covered in water, because then again, the green stuff won't stick. Here you'll have a first glimpse on how green stuff behaves. In this shot I'm trying to join the first stripe with another chunk, since it wasn't long enough to cover the entire skull. This can be achieved by dipping your tool on the overlap, as long as you're doing it carefully. You're not a blacksmith and the stealer is not an anvil. Perhaps one of the most important hints I can give is that you should have a lot of patience once you start sculpting, because you're going to be redoing parts and pieces over and over again. And as you can see right now, don't expect to be able to do an entire layer in one piece. Oftentimes you'll have to piece it together from many smaller chunks. Actually, that's pretty much the regular case. The joining doesn't seem to be working out here. The paper tissue gives us a hint as to why. There was a drop of water below the chunk of green stuff I added. At this point, I'm softly pushing against the edges of the stripe to redefine the boundaries. Here I'm using the tool to push the putty. This is another joining technique. Push the two chunks together and then gently wipe over the joint to join them. Again, this takes some patience. And some more pushing against the edge, this time on the other side. Be advised, this will take some time. Unless you are very lucky, you won't be able to do it perfectly with just a few movements of your sculpting tool. Remember when I talked about cutting green stuff with the sharpened edge of my tool? The major advantage of doing this is that not only you can instantly redefine the shape of your work, but it'll also be pushed firmly against the surface on which it is sculpted. I can't stress this enough. You'll have to be patient. Some parts will have to be done again and again and again. The next part focuses on actual detail work. Mind you, we're still in a preliminary stage. This is not how the end result will look. We're going for a more three-dimensional look, as I will explain later in the video. For now, however, we're aiming for a mostly flat structure. The key to achieving a smooth surface is gently wiping over the chitin and using your tool forwards and backwards. Here comes the tricky part. Green stuff behaves somewhat like a highly viscous fluid. If you're only going in one direction, say the back of the Steeler's head, you're smoothing it, but you're also lengthening it. So you'll have to work in the opposite direction to make sure it stays the shape you want. And of course, as seen in the video, you can combine the techniques of dipping and push and wipe. I guess by now, you might have noticed that sculpting may take quite a while sometimes. Every now and then, you might accidentally have too much water on your tool after moisturizing it. Of course, it'll go right on your miniature. This seems to be like a universal law. In this case, as we did before, just use your paper tissue to remove the excess water. And after a lot of push and wipe, of dipping and smoothing, you'll have a nice and clean surface. This, however, is not the look I was going for. Tyranids are extremely aggressive creatures, perfectly illustrated by the design of hormigons. They look much more intimidating than termagants, simply because their cranial chitin planes are edgier, suggesting danger and aggression. Some, like the one shown, even features horns. Since those gulls always have 5 chitin plates, I wanted my gene stealer to have 5 too. It's a knit thing to have 5 plates. So, how do we go about that? I used the edged part of my sculpting tool to cut into the plates. Not straight from above, but from an acute angle, no more than 35 to 40 degrees. I'm stamping, so to speak, the smooth surface I've just made to create an artificial recess between the plates. I mentioned this earlier, but green stuff behavior is pretty peculiar and seems counterintuitive when you first start sculpting. Whenever I push into it one side, the green stuff that was displaced here has to go somewhere, so you'll most likely have to do some corrections every once in a while. The 5 plates may seem done for now, but you'll quickly notice that some parts have shifted slightly. In this case, it's the surface of the plates. To straighten that, I just gently wipe over them. If you're wiping from both sides, you'll push the green stuff into the middle, turning it into a ridge of sorts. From here on, most of the work in this chapter is just corrections. To make sure the surface is smooth again, I'll do as many corrections as it takes, and boy, it takes a lot. As you're constantly pushing, wiping, and dipping on your model, some parts may shift again without you noticing. For me, it was the rear triangular plate. If that happens, just do some more pushing until you get it right. That's really the only thing that helps. One of the best things about the blade of the sculpting tool is that you can't only use it for cutting, scratching, and so on, but that the flat, angular shape of it can be used to pretty much instantly create similar shapes, albeit negatives, in the putty. In this shot, all I'm doing is to simply rearrange the ridge. All the pushing and smoothing shifted the line a little too much. We're going for a beeline, so to speak. This shot illustrates perfectly what I mentioned earlier, how every single interaction with green stuff causes it to constantly shift. You might want to pause your work from time to time just to take a really close look, keep track of what happens on your miniature, and you'll do fine. After smoothing the surface of the plates, the prolonged work on it has caused the edges to become less crisp. Here's another neat little trick. Use the flat of your tool's blade to gently push against it. It'll automatically be raised and therefore redefined. And some more corrections. Yes, it's still an essential truth. Sculpting requires patience. To improve the look of the plates, I'm using my tool to softly stab below their edges. And by raising them a wee bit, it'll become a little more three-dimensional. So after a nearly insane amount of corrections, I'm mostly happy with the result. The plates are smooth and well edged now. finally, we've arrived at chapter definition. It boils down to the following. We've quite literally laid a foundation in the previous step. That foundation had one entire day to set now and will be used to build the actual chitin ridge. I mentioned before that I want my gene stealer to look way more aggressive than the standard model, and term against style rounded plates just don't emphasize that enough. So now, using the techniques we discussed earlier, we'll give the miniature a lot more definition. Back when I cut the first chunk of green stuff, I said that I want to make it as simple as possible, so I'm breaking it down to simple geometric forms that can easily be applied. In this case, it's a tiny little triangle, and all that's left to do is push it on top of the plate I sculpted in the last chapter. And what was true before is still true now. The more careful you correct the shifting on your miniature, the better it's going to look in the end. You might have noticed before that I keep on turning the model around and around and around. Of course, the primary reason for this is to reach every last corner of it, but it also serves to view it from every possible angle. Sometimes paint jobs and sculpts alike look great from one side, while they're rather meh from another side. And to prevent that, keep on turning! Here's a quick comparison shot between the model I'm currently working on and the one that's already mostly done. Minus base and limbs, that is. Equally important, if details are in the way of whatever it is you're sculpting, you want to adapt to the new circumstances. In the case of my Steeler's horn, I wouldn't recommend trying it in one go. I first modeled the second chitin plate and then begun working on the front plate. Just add another chunk of green stuff and push and wipe it into the direction of the second plate. The next part will teach you how to join the green stuff chitin and the plastic horn. The overall technique is hardly different to the joining of two chunks of green stuff. Just push some of the green stuff towards the horn and wipe it up from the bottom, from the base of the horn to the top, its tip. The layer of green stuff will progressively become thinner and smoother until you finally can't tell the difference between plastic and putty anymore. Well, except of course for the color, because one is green and the other one is gray, but so, except for a little excess water, the plates are done now. Unless, of course, you want them to have some more character to them. A few days ago, when I was working on the leg plates of the other jean stealer I showed you earlier in this video, my best man told me that some chinks in the chitin might do wonders for the overall look. Those chinks are totally easy to do. Use a blade of your tool and gently push it, this time at 90 degrees, into the edge of the plates. Give it a tiny little wiggle and you'll have a great characterful chink done basically without any effort. Of course, since you're effectively displacing some putty here, you'd have to do some more corrections. Now, a single chink is still boring, or once is never, as the German saying goes, so I'll do another one. Stab, wiggle, smooth. Make sure to absorb the extra water before you call your model done. The refractive index of water is much greater than that of air. The lens effect will essentially hide smaller irregularities from you when you're looking at details on a wet model. As the chitin plates are done, so too is the tutorial. I hope you had some fun watching my first tutorial, or rather, its English dub. The German version was the first one, and you could learn a thing or two. See you in the next video, and let me know in the comments if there's anything you would like to see as a tutorial. Bye, see you next time!